Hey folks, so today we are going to be talking a little bit about fallacies. Now, this is an overview of some of the material that you've already read, and everything's an argument. And I would also ask you to go ahead and look at the PowerPoint that I've placed on Blackboard that also goes over a number of different fallacies. But in this lecture, I'm going to talk a little bit about fallacies at work and how fallacies relate to a rhetorical analysis paper. So as you've probably already checked out, fallacies are flawed arguments, right? Problematic arguments, or things that you shouldn't do when you're trying to construct a sound argument, right? We've talked about rhetorical strategies, things that strengthen your writing. Rhetorical fallacies are kind of the antithesis of rhetorical strategies. These are things that really bring down arguments, and when you see them, they often cause you, rather than to be persuaded, they cause you to be dissuaded. Okay, so as you're reading, right, sometimes you'll say, oh, wow, this was a really convincing piece, but other times you will come to the conclusion that, wow, this text or this speech or this argument failed to prove convincing. And if you were analyzing why it failed, you could use rhetorical fallacies to help you out. So we're going to be looking at two rhetorical fallacies in action. And then we're going to look at a sample paragraph from a student who did a rhetorical analysis of a speech and was talking about how the speech failed. And in the body paragraphs, discussed some of the rhetorical fallacies that led to the overall failure of the argument. So let's go ahead and check out this first quotation. Okay, it says, "We cannot let more immigrants into this country." That's the assertion. "If we do, they're going to be on our porches, at our jobs, in our schools before we know it. Is this what we want for a great country?" So I'll challenge you, what fallacy seems to be at work here? You might pause and take a second to reread what fallacy seems to be at work. Well, if you said slippery slope, you're correct, right? So notice it goes from immigrants coming to this country to immigrants being on our porches without any sort of evidence, right? It just seems to the argument is quickly escalated, and we don't know what evidence the Lexington is using to back up this claim. It doesn't seem like he has any. It just seems like a wild series of events that he's putting forward. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the second one. "Do not talk to me about a new program for low-income families. You have no integrity and were fired from 2 jobs. In addition, over the past 2 years, you have received a number of fat bonuses from your current job. I'm not even going to listen to any of your crackpot ideas." So again, I'm going to challenge you, what fallacy seems to be at work here? Well, if you said ad hominem, you're correct. Notice that Murkowski doesn't say anything about the new program for low-income families. He doesn't criticize the actual program. Instead, he criticizes the other person's character, right? Saying that, oh, well, you've been fired and you've received fat bonuses and your ideas are crackpot. Now, he doesn't back up any of this, right? He just attacks the character of the person rather than attacking or criticizing the actual program. Okay, so these are two fallacies at work, right? We see fallacies all the time, especially with the elections coming up. If you listen to any of the speeches, you will begin to hear fallacies at work. Okay, so you might be asking yourself the question, well, how could I use this for rhetorical analysis? Well, let's say you were reading a text and you think, you know what, this isn't a good argument. You know what, I'm seeing a lot of fallacies. Well, instead of proving or having a thesis that says, yes, ultimately, this text was persuasive for whatever reasons you're going to say, you could say, you know what, ultimately, this text failed to persuade. And if you took that assertion, a body paragraph could look like this. And this is written by a former student. And the student was talking about this Lexington speech which we just read a part of for our first fallacy example. Let's go ahead and look at what the student said and how they really explained the effect of this fallacy on readers. Okay, so they begin by setting it up. In a recent town hall meeting, Lexington declared that we cannot let more immigrants into this country. If we do, they are going to be on our porches, at our jobs, in our schools before we know it. Is this what we want for a great country? So notice they've set up the quotation, they've quoted it, and now they're going to analyze it. By escalating his assertion about immigrants so quickly, Lexington engages in a slippery slope fallacy, presupposing certain things about immigrants to the United States without any evidence to support his wild claims. Though Lexington's words might work on listeners who favor anti-immigration laws, ultimately, his fallacious reasoning alienates listeners who care about logic, reason, and hard evidence. And this would be an example of a pretty solid body paragraph for rhetorical analysis that was looking at a text failure, right? And a few things that I want to highlight. Notice how we talked about says versus does, right? Notice how the student gets into what this text does to an audience, not just what it says. It names the slippery slope. And I really like this part at the end of the paragraph where it says, hey, it may work for certain audiences, right? If a person's really anti-immigration, this argument might not work. But then we get that ultimately transition and we see why it ultimately fails. Okay, so for more on fallacies of argument, please check out the Everything's an Argument reading, as well as the PowerPoint that I also have on Blackboard.